Her husband left after the baby girl cried. He didn't look back, didn't pause on the dusty trail leading out of the small shack, didn't even flinch when the wails pierced the night like a dying coyote's scream. She stood barefoot at the door, clutching the newborn against her chest, eyes stinging with the sting of betrayal, but no tears fell. The baby cried, he left, and silence swallowed the land around them. That was how the end began. The prairie wind bit against her skin as the oil lamp flickered, barely giving enough light to chase away the shadows on the wooden walls. He had sworn forever, he had sworn family, he had sworn never to leave. But the cries of an innocent child had been too much for him, too much weight, too much noise, too much life. His boots had faded into the horizon, leaving her with nothing but the sound of her daughter's fragile lungs and the emptiness of the night. She thought about following him, begging maybe, but pride was all she had left. And pride wouldn't let her crawl. The only thing that mattered now was the tiny heartbeat pressed against her breast. She whispered, promising the child that no matter how empty the nights became, no matter how harsh the world grew, she would never abandon her. Days passed into weeks, and the shack grew colder. The pantry was bare, the firewood low, and her body weak from sleepless nights. The baby's cries echoed through the empty valley, calling for milk, calling for warmth, calling for a future. She tried, God knows she tried, but every passing hour felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of her will. The rancher came when the land was frozen hard and the world seemed ready to bury her in snow. He rode in silent, a lone figure against the gray horizon, his horse's breath rising like smoke in the bitter air. He didn't speak at first, didn't announce himself like most men did with loud greetings and empty grins. He simply stopped at the fence line, dismounted, and watched her try to split wood with trembling hands. The axe slipped, nicking her palm. She gasped, clutching her hand, and the baby's cry spilled from the shack behind her. The sound carried across the yard, thin but sharp, slicing through the quiet. He tilted his head, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that studied her with a kind of calm she didn't understand. "You'll bleed out," he finally said, his voice low, steady, a voice that seemed carved out of the earth itself. She bit her lip, glaring at him with the fire of a woman who had been abandoned and had nothing left to give but defiance. Better than freezing, he didn't argue. Instead, he walked forward, steady steps crunching in the snow, and reached for the axe. His gloved hands took it like it belonged there, and within minutes, he had stacked more wood than she could have in days. She wanted to protest, wanted to tell him she didn't need saving, but when the baby wailed again, she found herself silent. He followed the sound into the shack, not asking permission, only bowing his head as though he understood he was stepping into a sacred place. She watched him carefully, ready to throw herself between him and her child if need be. But when he reached the crib, his rough hands softened, fingers brushing the blanket with a gentleness that didn't fit the broadness of his shoulders. The baby quieted almost instantly. It was the first time in weeks the cabin had known peace. From that day forward, the silent rancher kept returning. He fixed the door that hung crooked, repaired the roof that dripped, and brought meat from his hunts. He spoke little, almost never smiled, but his actions filled the emptiness her husband had left behind. He didn't ask for thanks, didn't ask for company, didn't ask for anything at all. He simply gave, and slowly, her fear of him melted into something else. Trust, perhaps, or maybe just the relief of knowing she wasn't alone. But trust is a dangerous thing in a land where the wind carries more secrets than words. One night, when the baby was feverish and the mother's heart was pounding with dread, the rancher appeared without warning. He carried herbs, water, and a quiet strength that made her believe the child would live. She clutched his coat, eyes wet for the first time since her husband had left, and whispered, "Why are you doing this? Why us?" His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing, only stared at the fire as though the flames carried answers. Finally, he muttered, "Because once, I lost someone too. And no one came, that was all, nothing more." But in those words, she felt the weight of a sorrow too heavy for even the strongest shoulders. He carried loss like a scar across his soul, and yet he chose to shield her and the baby from knowing the same fate. Spring came, and with it, whispers from the town. People spoke of the rancher, how he had taken in a woman and her child, how he called the little girl by his name at church, how he stood between them and the cruel tongues that wagged. Some praised him, some judged him, but no one dared confront him. His silence was more powerful than any man's shouting. The woman found herself smiling again, though she tried to hide it. The baby grew stronger, learning to laugh, her small hands reaching always for the rancher. And in those quiet evenings, when the fire glowed and the baby slept between them, the woman allowed herself to imagine a future, one with safety, one with love, one where her daughter would grow up never knowing the sting of abandonment. But the West is not kind to those who dream. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, the figure of her husband rode back into the valley. His hat low, his horse ragged, his eyes hollow. He had come not for her, not for the baby, but for something else. She saw greed in his gaze, the hunger of a man who had lost everything and remembered suddenly that once he had claimed her as his. The rancher stood on the porch when the husband dismounted. Silence stretched heavy between them, the kind of silence that only two men who understood violence could share. The husband sneered, spitting into the dirt. "You think you can take what's mine?" he hissed. The rancher didn't move, didn't even flinch. He only said, "She stopped being yours the day you walked away." The gun came fast, quicker than the woman could scream. But the rancher was quicker still. His draw was silent, precise, like the snapping of a rattlesnake. The shot rang across the valley, echoing through the mountains. Her husband fell, dust rising around him, his pistol still in hand but his life already gone. The baby stirred inside, letting out a small cry. The rancher's hand trembled for just a second before he holstered his gun. He turned to her, his face shadowed, his voice steady. "He won't hurt you again. Either of you." She stood frozen, torn between grief, relief, and the strange calm that settled over her. He had given her safety, given her life, and now given her a name that meant more than any vow her husband had ever spoken. The baby reached for him when he stepped inside, her tiny hands grasping at his shirt. He lifted her, his rough voice breaking into the softest whisper. "You're mine now." And just like that, the land that had taken so much gave something back, a family, born not of blood, but of choice. The West would remember the silent rancher not for the lives he took, but for the one he saved. And every whisper of wind across the prairie carried the story of the woman and child who cried, and the man who answered in silence, giving them his name, his home, and the promise of never leaving.